So as we get started tonight in our Revelation study, tonight is going to be the last study that we have, and then we're going to take a couple week break for Christmas and New Year's. So we'll get back on January 7th, and I'll send out a reminder for that. But in light of this, I was looking at Revelation 6 tonight, and it's probably not a one-night study. And I didn't want to get started and then take a couple weeks off, and then end up rehashing everything when we came back. But I was thinking, since it's not a one-nighter, there are some other areas that we can certainly, especially as we get into, we're going to talk about the seals tonight. Don't worry about that. But I want to approach this from a different viewpoint before we get into the nitty-gritty of chapter 6. So kind of like thinking of doing more of an overview / background of what we're really talking about when we start getting to the seals and the trumpets and the bowls. Because I think they each have their own purpose and their own values. And a lot of times we just lump them all together, that there's 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, boom, boom, boom. And I don't view that at all. I think there's a time and a place for each of those judgments. But it can really help us understand a little bit more. So that's what I was thinking we would do tonight. So let's jump into this, where a lot of times you've heard people say, and I guarantee you've heard me say it as well, that we're in the last days. Well, what do you mean by the last days? Why do you think we're in the last days? Is this just something that we have just become accustomed to, and it's becomes almost like a Christian cliches, Christian language, that we just start talking about different things? What are some of the actual signs? What are some of the actual things that are going on right now that makes us say that, hey, we're in the last days? And, even when we start looking at some things, some people would say that things are worse today than they were yesterday. And certainly, things are worse, today than it was 20 years ago. Others would say that there's always been evil and sin in the world, and that it's always been a downward spiral. However, the Bible seems to be very clear that the closer that we get to the return of Jesus Christ, that the closer that we get to the kingdom here on earth, let me say that, the more people will practice bad behavior, okay? So the closer we get to the physical return of Jesus Christ, people are just going to be more evil than we've ever known. And I think that's easy to see. Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 3, just really quick, he described how people are going to be in the last days. Tell me if this seems familiar. He says that they're going to be lovers of themselves, that they're going to be lovers of money, that they're going to be boastful and proud, that they're going to be abusive, they're going to be disobedient to their parents. I find that one to be fascinating, by the way, because we overlook that one. It's just their personality. No, disobedient to parents. Ungrateful and unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure instead of lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. I mean, does any of that sound familiar? Like we're living in the last days. And, even again, the condition of the condition of evil and people, it goes from bad to worse the more that people become more deceived and the more that they participate in deception and darkness. That's why, hey, the world is full of darkness and Jesus is the light. This is why we need to be telling people about Jesus, because he's the light. Otherwise, people are stumbling in darkness. And the only way that things are going to stop, the world is going to continue to spiral out of control, continue a downward spiral. Romans chapter 1 talks about that God gave them over to their evil desires. If God lets go of us, the only thing that's going to happen is gravity's taking over, unless God intervenes supernaturally and catches us. And that's why we need Jesus. But Paul's talking about this, and this is kind of a general category of the mindset of people, but then it starts to be like, well, that's always been around. What, are we really in the last days, though? And this is where Jesus starts to mention some things. And I want to take us to the Olivet Discourse. And now the Olivet Discourse, that's like Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. In fact, I believe that Mark Heil, he talked about Matthew 24 a few weeks ago when I was gone. No, I know Mark, I know he did a great job with that. I'm going to handle things a little different, a different angle here, because I want to tie this in with Revelation chapter 6, because I think there are some connections here to where in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus tells his followers what signs are going to occur before the second coming of Jesus, before his second coming, when he comes again, and at the end of the age. Okay, so what are the things that we can be specifically looking for? And I'm not even going to get into some of the prophetic things like a temple in Israel and different things like that. We'll talk about some of that later. But just looking at what Matthew 24 says, the Olivet Discourse, and then starting to overlay it with Revelation 6, you start to see some comparisons. Let me quick read something here. Matthew chapter 24, verses 7 and 8. Jesus says, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Okay? Just take note of this and as we break this down. So, as you're probably very familiar with, Jesus, when he taught, he would use things from everyday life to communicate his lessons, to communicate his teachings. And in this case, when he starts talking about his second coming, he uses the analogy of a woman in labor as she prepares to give birth, in order to describe the changes that have to take place in the world. This is so as a woman, and this is theoretical for me, by the way, since I'm a guy. So ladies, you know far much more than I do with these events. But as a woman approaches the time of delivery, and as labor begins, what ends up happening is that the labor pains, the birth pains, I should say, it begins to increase in frequency and severity. So the closer that the baby is to be born, the pain intensifies, and the pain, there are shorter spans of rest in between the pain. And so what Jesus is saying is that prior to his coming, the second coming, he's saying that these signs that we're going to talk about tonight, that these signs are going to increase in frequency and severity as his return approaches. So the Old Testament prophets, I'm thinking of Isaiah chapter 26. This is worth taking note of. But the Old Testament prophets also talked about birth pains in relation to the kingdom of God. And let me just say that for a minute here, that what is really being birthed is the kingdom. That is what's coming. And so this imagery that Jesus is giving to us, that, hey, if the birth pains are starting, it means that the kingdom's not far off. That the kingdom, when the kingdom comes, there's a major transition that happens as this age ends and there's a new age to come. And the kingdom comes, again, when Christ returns from heaven. So listen to what Isaiah chapter 26 says. This is verses 17 and verse 21. It says, Isaiah writes, as a woman with child and about to give birth writhes and cries out in her pain, so were we in your presence, O Lord. See, the Lord is coming out of his dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. Now, that passage, Isaiah 26, he describes birth pains. He describes the resurrection of the dead. He describes the Lord's earthly kingdom. I mean, all of those things are things that the Bible says that these things take place at the second coming. And let me just focus really quick on verse 21 of Isaiah 26. It says, see, the Lord is coming out of his dwelling to punish the people of the earth for their sins. This right here, I believe, describes the tribulation period. The tribulation, we'll talk more about this certainly in a couple of weeks when we get back from vacation here. But the tribulation, that's not God giving us a difficult time. The tribulation is people are getting what they have earned. And this is the result of sin. In Galatians, it says that God will not be mocked. You're going to reap what you sow. And so the longer that there has been sin in this earth, okay, the longer that we have continued in sin, the tribulation, this is that period to where we are getting what we deserve. Now, the wrath of God is not for and let me just say, the tribulation, I believe, is for everyone. I don't think the church gets a pass. I think the church is right here through it. And I'll be explaining that more as we go on. But this is us getting exactly what we deserve. When I say us, I say humanity. That this is fallen man. This is us getting exactly what we deserve because of sin. This is not the wrath of God. This is tribulation. And just so you think, why would the church go through that? Well, we could point to other things to where, let's see, Noah. Let's talk about Noah really quick. Noah and his family, they weren't spared from the flood. They still went through the flood. God just protected them. but the flood still happened. Other events that you can also think of to where, no, God was there with them, but they still had to go through it along with everyone else. They're just a different perspective. I think we will have a different perspective as well. But nevertheless, the tribulation, the signs of the time, the birth pains, I really like this image of the birth pains, because the birth pains, we've known that, when a woman is pregnant, unless it's a TLC show, pregnant and didn't know it type idea, a woman knows when she's pregnant. I mean, it's been 9 months of a baby growing within her body, and as the baby, we just don't know the exact day or the hour when the baby's going to be born, but we see all the signs, we see everything that's happening, and we know that delivery is getting close as the birth pains strengthen as they grow in frequency and severity. So let me get back on track here. So I love the imagery of birth pains. Now, the Bible mentions 7 different birth pains, you might say, okay? There's nation rising up against nation. Or in this case, I'm going to say it's ethnic group rising against ethnic group. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But ethnic group against ethnic group. You have kingdom against kingdom. You have earthquakes. You have famines. You have pandemics. You have fearful events. You have great signs from heaven. These are 7 signs that give a very clear picture of what the birth pains are. So let me just break these down, because there is an overlay between these 7 events and the seals that we're going to see in chapter 6. So the first birth pain that is translated nation against nation, nation rising against nation, the Greek word ethnos is what's translated as nation. However, ethnos, and you're probably already 1 step ahead of me here, it also means tribe or ethnic group. That's where we get the word ethnic. So we'll have more understanding of this particular birth pain if we think of ethnic group rising against ethnic group. And especially in today's world, we are seeing more ethnic groups fighting against other ethnic groups. Certainly you have, in Africa, you have tribes. There's been a history of conflict between the different tribes throughout Africa. You have, in Yugoslavia, you have conflict between the Croatians and the Serbs and the Albanians. In Iraq, there are different ethnic, religious groups fighting against each other. Look what's been happening in 2020, even here in the U.S. In order to cause division, there have been all kinds of race riots. And to where racism is, the pot is being stirred very much. And I think the reason why it's being stirred is for political control, by the way. That's just a Greaves opinion. But it's trying to get control. If people can be divisive, then there can be someone who can step in and try to calm everyone down. But we see this, ethnic groups fighting against ethnic groups, right? Kingdom will rise against kingdom. Now, kingdoms are historically governed by kings, so we don't necessarily have this idea, but today kingdoms would be nations, and that's the idea, that it would be nation against nation. I think all you got to really do is turn on the TV or open the internet and to see that there's always some war going on. I mean, I don't think there's been any period of history where there hasn't been some kind of war going on within the world. But there's always war going on. And And I would even say that this, national supported terrorism, that also plays into this, to where that's nation against nation, that's kingdom against kingdom idea. And so the birth pains continue. This particular birth pain of war, that's going to continue until the birth of the kingdom. War is a great example of this. From the days of the prophets to the book of Revelation, we are told, and we'll get there in time, but we are told that there is going to be a final war that will take place at the very end of this age, before the kingdom is birthed. And that all the nations are going to go against the king. So keep that in mind, that there will be no end of war in this age. This is just something you can, if we were a church that embraced betting and gambling, this would be a sure bet, to where there's not going to be an end of war as long as we know it. Then there's a third birth pain, and it talks about great earthquakes, okay? This is always one, whenever there's a big earthquake, I always get the question, or people start saying, well, Jesus must be coming back because there's just a big earthquake. Well, you know what? There have always been earthquakes, but we have been seeing more earthquakes, and some pretty big doozies. I mean, where there's 6, 7 or higher on the Richter scale, and they're killing hundreds, thousands of people. But the severity of this birth pain, not only does this birth pain seem to be increasing, but the frequency of earthquakes is increasing. Listen to this. This is taken from it's a government website. It's actually earthquake.usgs.gov. And just within the past 30 days, here are some significant earthquakes. There's a 4.4, 6.1, 6.1, 3.6, 6.4, 6.3, 6.4, 6.1, and they're all over. We're talking Chile, Russia, Argentina, Alaska, California, Taiwan, Hawaii. I mean, this just in the last 30 days, that these earthquakes, so they're coming more frequent, and they're becoming more severe. Just to highlight a few, back in 2004, now I know that's been a while, but there was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake that killed almost 300,000 people in Indonesia, and that resulted in a tsunami. I'm sure you remember that one. There was an 8.7 in northern Sumatra, again, Indonesia. That was like I guess about 4 or 5 months later from the 9.0. Pakistan, 7.6. I mean, you follow this. And here's the point: if earthquake activity follows the pattern of birth pains, then we should be expecting the earthquakes to continue to increase in magnitude and frequency. And just like the wars, this is a birth pain that goes the distance. The Bible records in Revelation that an earthquake is going to occur at the exact same time Jesus returns to earth, and it's going to be more powerful than any earthquake ever in the history of the world. And the prophet Zechariah indicates that this final earthquake, it's going to happen when Jesus literally, figuratively, literally and physically rather, stands on the Mount of Olives, which is just east of Jerusalem. Now, the reason why I say literally and physically is because there are many churches and many scholars that do not believe that Jesus Christ is literally coming back again. But this right here, when Zechariah talks about this, and we'll get there in Revelation too about this big earthquake. That's a pretty specific prophetic detail. That's just not imagery. It's just not metaphorical, but that is something that happens when Jesus Christ stands on the Mount of Olives. So the physical return of Jesus Christ, well, you got to take that literally. Let me keep going here before we celebrate Christmas together, before I run out of time. The next birth pain is that of famines. Are you starting to see some of the overlap in Revelation 6 here? But we're going to break down Revelation 6. Don't worry about that. Famines. The next birth pain is famines. Famines are disastrous. It leads to the death of thousands of people, leaves many more people sick, malnourished, and famines can be caused from drought. It can be caused from crop failure, which sometimes can be complicated because of political or economic issues. Famines can also occur because of natural or man-made disasters. Well, if there's war, that's not a really good time to be planting crops, is there? If there are earthquakes, it can destroy crops, because with earthquakes, a lot of times there can be the wells dry up. Genocide, when there are dictators that are ruling different nations and they're killing their people. Again, there are domino effects that take place that causes famines to really be prevalent. And if you start thinking over the years of different famines, obviously in the 80s, you have Ethiopia and Sudan in the 90s. You have Somalia and Kenya and Zimbabwe. I mean, there are obviously a lot of African countries have suffered from famine, and this is one of those things to where we're talking about millions of people dying, and we even see here, when our government pays farmers to plow under their crops, which I don't quite understand, or we use our crops for fuel, like corn for ethanol, and when we keep the food supply, believe me, we're blessed. But if you take a look at the grocery stores every once in a while, you can see where the price of food is increasing. That's law of supply and demand, to where the food prices are increasing because the food prices are increased because the supply is low. We certainly saw that during 2020, to where when we're in the middle of a global pandemic because of COVID, meat processing plants shut down. And so the price of meat, skyrockets, and it also becomes difficult to find. I know there's a worldwide shortage of rice that's currently going on, that sometimes you're limited in how much rice you can buy, or at least it was just a few months ago. But anyways, there's famine. And as we get closer to the birth of the kingdom, the famine is going to increase and it's going to become more severe. It's just a matter of time before we really start seeing the issues here in our blessed nation. And here's another birth pain. The fifth type of birth pain is pestilence. This means plagues, disease, epidemics, pandemics, And there have been pandemics that have occurred regularly over the centuries. Um, you got the Spanish flu in 1918, which killed between 20 million and 40 million people. It's probably the most devastating pandemic ever recorded in world history. You have the Asian flu in 1957, which killed about 2 million people. The Hong Kong flu in 1968 killed about 1 million people. The bird flu, I don't know how many that killed. Then you also had swine flu. And of course, you have COVID going on, to where this is a pandemic. And after COVID, guess what? There's going to be something else that comes along. Um, you also have, as far as, and I'm going to, some might disagree with me, but in the category of pestilence, you also have HIV/AIDS, to where that just continues to threaten, particularly Africa. Um, Africa has a little bit more than 10% of the world's population, and about 60% of that population, so about 40 million people, are living with AIDS. This is this clearly, this is an issue that is being dealt with. This is sickness, and a lot of times sickness comes because of a famine. Famines come because of war. You follow what I'm saying here. And then let's keep going on here. There's another one which says that it would be fearful events. Luke chapter 21, verse 11, Jesus says this. He says, there will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. So fearful events are one of the signs that are going to begin to the birth pains. There's a whole lot of things that fit into the category of fearful events. Certainly pandemics. Fear is off the charts with COVID right now. Depression, anxiety, the suicide rate is spiking. People are certainly fearful, okay? But then there are other things that can also cause fear. Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, tidal waves, tsunamis, monsoons. Doesn't it seem as though that within the last number of years, there have been more hurricanes than previously? In fact, I think this year we just set the record for the most named hurricanes in a season, when we actually got deep into the Greek alphabet. But you get these major hurricanes too. And I'm thinking of some of like Wilma and Katrina, Andrew. My family suffered from Andrew. You get Rita, and you get Ivan and Isabel. You get, Michael. You get, I'm drawing a blank on some of the names. But here, Hermine, I know, affected us here. It's just, there are more hurricanes. Even this past year in 2020, there was a land hurricane in Iowa that wiped out all the corn crops. So expect corn prices to go up, by the way. Again, famine, this kind of things happen, to where all these fearful events, whether it's natural events, because in my personal mind, my opinion here, and I take this from Romans chapter 8, that the earth, all creation is groaning, waiting for the return of Christ. And I think part of that groaning is part of the birth pains. So expect more weather disasters, you might say, fearful events. And then you have the last birth pain, the last sign. And this brings to mind many things. You get like comets and solar eclipses, lunar eclipses. You get asteroids. You get meteors. We got one coming up here on December 21st, to where, what is it, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be overlapping each other. It's going to create probably what was the Bethlehem star. You have like Halley's Comet in 1985, when that made its pass. Man, a lot of people thought that was a sign of the end of the time. That, oh, this is it. This is it. There's talk about an asteroid that could hit the Earth in 2029. And some are saying, well, we think it's just going to pass by. It's like maybe 20,000 miles, which is pretty close, really close. But they're saying that could hit. Certainly the scripture talks about wormwood that's going to hit the planet. But anyways, these are all different events, cosmic events, that as we start talking about the return of Christ, as we start talking about is it or isn't it, are we in the last days, these are all things that we need to be looking at. And now another big question could be this: is, do the birth pains begin when we see the first of the signs, or do they begin when we see all 7 of these signs occurring together? And I think part of the answer is that the signs are progressive. They happen one after another, and they occur in sequence, but they really start increasing in severity and frequency, like I said. And if you take a look back over this list of birth pains, right? It seems like the world has already begun to experience them. So, and Jesus said that these things have got to take place before he comes back. So the question really becomes then, are these things, have they just always been, or have these things been taking place, and that that we should start looking for the kingdom? Let me before I answer that. So our study is in Revelation, right? And in chapter 6, where we are, well, theoretically tonight, we'll pick up it on January 7th. John is writing about a series of 7 seals, and then he gets into 7 trumpets and 7 bowls. And each of these series, the seals, the trumpets, the bowls, they start at different times. But they all conclude with the second coming of the Messiah. All right? So obviously we're going to discuss certainly the trumpets and the bowls in more detail. And like I said, when we get back in a couple of weeks, we'll get into the seals, because they're the first seals of signs. But, and here's a connection I'm trying to make. Just like the birth pains that are mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, they contain early warning signs that the end of the age is approaching. That if you've been kind of paying attention here, the 7 seals seem to parallel the Olivet Discourse birth pains. So both start with people in conflict, nations in conflict, and then earthquakes, famine, pestilence, and it ends with the signs from the heavens. So could it be, and this is the case that I'm making, could it be that we are living right now in the midst of the 7 seals being opened? That the 7 seals, that the Lamb who has been slain, Jesus Christ, as we talked about last week, he is worthy to open up the scrolls. And has he begun to open up the seals for the scroll? And that is what we are experiencing right now. So when the Olivet Discourse, and like I said, Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and Mark 13, Jesus starts to identify the same sequence of events and timetable that he reveals to John here in this letter in Revelation. When Jesus is speaking to his disciples on the Mount of Olives, he's speaking to them about from the perspective of how the birth pains are going to affect the earth, okay? And so his description is certainly of man-made and natural events, wars, earthquakes, famines. But on the other hand, when we get here in Revelation, when Jesus starts to reveal the seals and the four horsemen, when he starts to reveal this stuff to John, John has been brought up to heaven and he's receiving visions of the future. That John is able to see the supernatural side of the events as well as the natural side of what's going on. And so some of what he describes in Revelation, it's not visible to the people on earth. And there are several places throughout Scripture where there's an interaction between the supernatural realm and the natural realm, and Revelation is a perfect example of the two meshing together, that what we see from our perspective and what John sees from his perspective. So John is in heaven. He sees a scroll like a rolled up piece of parchment before him. And remember, last week we talked about that scroll, that's the title deed to the earth, that Jesus Christ is coming to reclaim the earth, because it was taken by Satan. When Satan duped Eve, and then Adam willingly rebelled because God had spoken to Adam and said, "Do not eat of this fruit." We handed over the title deed of the earth, or Adam and Eve handed over the title deed to the earth to Satan. And now Jesus needs to reclaim it. He needs to redeem it. And so, as we get into this, especially with this scroll, with the seven seals, that has prevented it's prevented from other things coming when they weren't supposed to come. So as each seal is broken open, we move closer to the time when the contents of the scroll can be read. And as each seal is open, John describes what he sees. And that's where we're going to end. But it's my opinion. And even though, let me just say, let me back up here. We're gonna close it down here, but let me just say this: that the Bible, as you read Scripture, the Old Testament and certainly Revelation, and there's lots of stuff that Paul's letters, that there's a lot of information, a great deal of information about the signs and events of the last days. And we've got to put them all together. We have to mesh them together. But Scripture doesn't tell us everything. There's no way to determine exactly when they start or how long they last, but we do know when they end. And we know that they end when the kingdom is birthed, when Jesus Christ literally, physically is here. But based on these biblical warnings, I'm going to say that I believe that we can observe what's taking place in the world today, and that we can conclude that the birth pains that Jesus started talking about in Revelation and Matthew 24 and other places, that the birth pains have already started. And I'm going to say this, that the first seal has been broken open already, that Antichrist is here. But we'll get more into that next time we get together. So next time we're together, we're going to start breaking down chapter 6. And like I said, I think probably what's going to happen, probably take the first 4 seals and then 1 week, and then finish chapter 6 the following week. And then there's a pause, but I'm starting to get ahead of myself. So pretty much, what we've been talking about tonight is that Jesus referred to birth pains that are going to start the countdown to when he returns. Earthquakes and wars, they're going to get progressively worse as the world gets closer to the return of Jesus. There are going to be signs from heaven that are going to take place just before he returns. This is a statement I'm making right here, is that the seals of Revelation, I believe, correspond to the early birth pains that Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24. So here's a homework assignment if you haven't done it lately. Go back and read Matthew 24, and it'll start giving you a big picture of the things we're going to be talking about next time we get together. That makes sense? That all makes sense? So if you've got questions, love you guys. I'm going to shut down the recording and we can keep talking here, all right?